soft glow of a wedding she never wanted. Elena O'Rourke slipped through a back corridor in silk shoes meant for another woman's dream. By sunrise she was hundreds of miles from Boston, wearing a borrowed hoodie and a name that wasn't hers. She thought freedom would taste like rain and gasoline. Instead it carried the metallic tang of fear. When she ducked into a riverside cafe to breathe, a man at the corner table looked up. Dark eyes, easy posture, the kind of silence that fills a room. He didn't ask who she was. He only said, "If you're running from someone dangerous, you've just run into someone worse." And still she did not leave. Rain had turned the Massachusetts highway into a smear of lights and water when Elena O'Rourke's borrowed sedan coughed its last breath. It happened 40 minutes after she had ripped the veil from her head and left it crumpled like a slain bird behind the church. The lace still clung to her skin in ghostly patterns. Adrenaline made her fingers tremble as she shoved the car door open. Freedom, it turned out, came with the scent of wet asphalt and burnt rubber. She dragged the hem of her ruined wedding gown through puddles until she found a service road that cut west toward the coastline. Her cousin's ID, fake, laminated, blessedly close enough to her own features, lay in her pocket. A bundle of cash, a phone she would later drop into the ocean. That was all. Every thunderclap tightened its grip on her spine because she could still hear her father's voice from that morning. "You will keep our family's word. No O'Rourke woman breaks a contract." But she had. The groom was nearly twice her age, an investment wrapped in a tuxedo. If she'd stayed, her life would have been collateral. By sunrise she reached a town locals called Calder's Bay, a line of weather-worn buildings leaning toward the harbor as if sharing secrets. The sea breathed fog across the streets, softening the edges of everything, except her fear. With her wet hair slicked back and the dress hidden beneath a fisherman's coat she'd stolen from a pier rail, she looked almost ordinary. A bell tinkled overhead as she stepped into a small cafe that smelled of espresso and rain-soaked wood. Few patrons. One old sailor dozing, a waitress humming to a radio, and a man at the corner table who did not fit here. He sat too still. Tailored charcoal jacket, open collar, wristwatch that whispered luxury without shouting it. An untouched espresso cooling in front of him. His dark gaze swept the doorway like a weapon disguised as curiosity. For a heartbeat, their eyes met, hers wide with exhaustion, his unreadable, and something electric crossed the air. Then she looked away and pretended to read the chalkboard menu. The waitress appeared. "Rough night. Rough life," Elena answered with a crooked smile that almost convinced herself. She ordered black coffee and sat near the window, close enough to the exit. 2 minutes later, a sleek black car eased to a stop outside. Rainwash gleamed on its hood. The man in the corner's phone buzzed once. He didn't answer. He just said quietly, "She's here." Cold climbed Elena's spine. Maybe it was paranoia. Maybe not. When she risked another glance, he was watching her. Not the casual interest of a flirt, but the alertness of someone memorizing every detail. He rose, slow and deliberate, and crossed the worn floorboards. "You're far from home," he said. No introduction, no smile. His accent carried Mediterranean warmth cut with steel. "I could say the same," she replied, lifting her chin. He studied her face like he was reading a file he already owned. "You should finish your coffee, Bella. Storm's not your only problem." Lightning flashed beyond the window, illuminating the men stepping out of the car. 2 shadows in tailored coats scanning the street. One of them wore the green cufflink of her father's security detail. Elena's pulse tripped. She looked back at the stranger. "If you're trying to scare me, I'm trying to keep your funeral off tomorrow's papers," he interrupted softly. "They'll check this place first." Come with me now, or run without knowing where. She hesitated, every instinct screaming that trading one hunter for another was madness. Yet there was something in his tone, a weary certainty of a man who'd made this offer before and regretted when people said no. "Who are you?" she asked. He pulled a leather jacket over his shoulders, eyes never leaving hers. "Someone your father would rather you never meet." Then his mouth curved, not cruelly, but with the inevitability of thunder after lightning. "Name's Marco DeLuca." The name landed like a verdict. She knew it. Everyone in Boston's underground did. The DeLuca family didn't lose people. They acquired them. Outside, the car doors slammed. Inside, her freedom balanced on a heartbeat. Marco opened the cafe's side door. "Decision time, Elena O'Rourke. You either walk back into their car, or you walk into mine." And against every promise she had made to herself, she stepped toward him. The rain followed them like a witness. Marco DeLuca's car, a black Maserati with windows tinted darker than confession booths, cut through the fog, tires hissing over wet asphalt. Elena sat rigid in the passenger seat, one hand gripping the door handle, the other clutching borrowed courage. She'd imagined freedom as sunlight and open roads, not the hum of an engine that belonged to a criminal dynasty. Marco drove with one hand, the other resting loosely on the wheel's edge, the posture of a man who never needed to prove control. Streetlights washed his face in alternating gold and shadow, revealing sharp cheekbones, a faint scar near his jaw, and eyes that didn't blink enough for comfort. "Your people will call the police," he said finally. "They'll tell a story about a kidnapped bride. Don't believe your own headlines." "I didn't ask for your help," Elena snapped. "Didn't have time to." She turned to the window, rain gathering in glassy rivers that caught her reflection. A runaway bride, hair tangled, mascara faintly smudged. Behind that face was a name she had spent a night trying to bury. O'Rourke. The sound of it could build or burn a city. Marco seemed to read the thought. O'Rourke. Irish family with shipping ties. Old blood. Her pulse stumbled. "How?" He offered a ghost of a smile. "Names have fingerprints. You don't lose them so easily." They exited onto a narrow street, the kind locals pretended not to see. A wrought iron gate slid open automatically as they approached a stone house set apart from the town. Modern lines, heavy silence. Inside, the scent of leather and espresso replaced the rain. Marco tossed her a towel and gestured toward the hearth where a low flame licked at cedar logs. "Dry off. You'll catch a fever before you catch your breath." "I don't need your charity," she said, though her shaking hands betrayed her. He poured 2 glasses of something dark and expensive. "It's not charity. It's irritation. You walked into my town the same night your father's men are sniffing around. That's a problem. Then let me leave. Too late. They'll expect you to run. You'll lead them straight here." He handed her the glass. "Drink. It helps with bad decisions." She hesitated, then took a cautious sip. Heat unfurled down her throat. "Why are you in Calder's Bay?" he asked. "Because it didn't exist on the family business map," she said. "I thought that meant safe." "Safe is just another myth we sell ourselves." He sat opposite her, elbows on his knees, gaze steady but not cruel. It unnerved her more than anger would have. "My father arranged a marriage." "I know," Marco cut in smoothly. "To Liam Costello." He needed the Costello political reach. "Problem is, Liam also launders money for the Russians. Not a romantic foundation." Her breath caught. "You've been following my family's affairs. A DeLuca has to know what debts exist in the city. Your father owes plenty." Then I'm not the only pawn, she said quietly. No one in our world's ever just a pawn. His tone softened. Sometimes we're the ones tipping the board over. Silence stretched, filled with a crackling fire. For the first time she noticed the framed photograph on the mantel. A young boy with bright eyes and a woman smiling beside him. Marco's shoulders stiffened when her gaze flicked there. My mother, he said before she could ask. She died the year I took the family business. Cancer, not bullets. Though in this world everything's a kind of bullet. Elena looked away. Grief was universal currency. I'm sorry. He nodded once, the gesture more acceptance than thanks. You should sleep. Guest rooms upstairs. Tomorrow I'll figure out what to do with you. What if I figure it out first? His mouth curved in that same faint, dangerous amusement. Then we'll both be surprised. He stood, coat brushing his wrists, a deliberate dismissal, but paused at the foot of the stairs. Don't try to run tonight. Not because I'd stop you, but because they will. When he disappeared into the hallway, the house seemed to hold its breath with her. Rain ticked against the windows like someone counting seconds. Elena sank onto the couch, the fire's glow tracing the edge of the towel she'd forgotten to drop. Every instinct screamed to walk back into the rain. Yet her body stayed where it was, drawn by something she couldn't name, perhaps the only kind of safety left to her. Fragile, borrowed, and dangerous. By morning, Calder's Bay shed its storm like a skin. Sunlight slid across dew-wet windows, catching on the silver letters of DeLuca Shipping and Logistics stenciled discreetly at the gate. The detail wasn't lost on Elena. She had fled one empire of men in tailored suits only to land inside another. The borrowed coat hung heavy on her shoulders as she stepped into the kitchen. Marco was already there. Shirt sleeves rolled, tie absent, black coffee in hand, reading a newspaper that hadn't yet hit the public stands. The quiet tick of a clock measured something between tension and routine. You don't sleep much, she said. He didn't look up. Sleep is for the guiltless. Then you must be an insomniac. That earned her a faint smirk. And you talk too easily for a fugitive. He folded the paper with surgical precision. Your father's men combed 3 towns south of here. They think you boarded a ferry to Rhode Island. You have a few days' grace. Elena sank into the chair opposite him. Then I should leave right now. He sipped his coffee. That would be unwise. Word travels faster than ferries. And you're of more use alive to me, for the moment. Use. Marco rose, walked to the window and opened it. The sea air curled through the room. You and I share a problem named Liam Costello. He's pretending your disappearance never happened, using it to strengthen ties with your father's rivals. They'll meet next week to discuss territory rights. She frowned. What does any of that have to do with me? He turned, eyes narrowing just a fraction. Symbolism, Elena. Your vanished wedding makes your father look weak. If you reappear at my side, your family will assume I took you. That gives me leverage to call a meeting of all players under neutral pretense. He stared. You want me to pretend to be yours. It's a temporary illusion. A public performance until I end Costello's alliance with the Russians. And when it's over, then you decide whether to vanish again or not. Her laugh was sharp, more nerves than humor. You're out of your mind if you think I'll play bride to another criminal. He approached, slow enough for her to feel cornered without being touched. You ran from a gilded cage into open fire. My offer is the only shield between you and the next bullet labeled O'Rourke. I'm not asking for your trust, just your cooperation. She found herself studying the scar near his jaw, wondering if it marked violence given or received. "And what assurance do I have you won't make me the next leveraged chip?" Marco's expression softened a degree. "Because if I wanted a pawn, I wouldn't give her a choice." He slid a thin envelope across the table. Inside, photographs of armed men outside a Boston townhouse. Her older brother's townhouse. Elena's throat closed. "What is this?" "Yesterday night. They're watching your brother to lure you out. Costello already suspects you're alive." The room tilted slightly. She gripped the table's edge to steady herself. "I can protect them," Marco said quietly, "if you stand beside me until the truce meeting. After that, I'll get your family safely out of the spiral Costello's building." He extended his hand. Casual, businesslike, dangerous. "This is the part where you ask what it costs." "What does it cost?" "A few appearances. A dinner here, a drive through town, a believable photograph for the press. You'll smile when I smile and look like you believe it. Can you do that?" Her mind flashed to her wedding dress soaking in the rain, to freedom that had felt like drowning. If her family truly hung in the balance, she couldn't afford pride. She placed her hand in his, heartbeat loud enough to fill the space between them. "I can pretend for a while." His fingers closed slowly around hers, firm, deliberate. "Good. Just remember, Elena, pretend long enough, and sometimes the act decides to become truth." He released her hand, picking up the newspaper again as if bargaining with fugitives before breakfast was routine. Outside, gulls screamed across the bay. Inside, two uneasy allies sat facing each other, each silently calculating who would betray the other first. The masquerade began with a camera flash. A DeLuca charity gala, officially for rebuilding a downtown youth center, unofficially a display of alliances, was the perfect stage for a fabricated romance. The room glowed in gold and crystal. Strings murmured from an invisible quartet while waiters glided through clusters of society's polite smiles and whispered deals. Elena stood just inside the ballroom's doors, wrapped in an emerald silk gown picked by Marco's tailor an hour before the event. Its open back felt like exposure. Its color, a declaration she hadn't consented to make. Her reflection caught in a mirror, elegant, composed, unrecognizable. When Marco appeared beside her, applause rippled from people who didn't dare call attention to why they were applauding. The infamous heir had brought a woman. That meant something in this city. He offered his arm. "If you're going to pretend," he murmured, "pretend flawlessly." Elena looped her hand through his with practiced grace. "I learned from professionals. My entire childhood was a lesson in performing obedience. That explains the posture. That explains the rebellion," she returned. He almost smiled at that, but the moment a photographer lifted a lens, his expression softened into practiced affection. One palm rested possessively at her back. The warmth should have felt like stage lighting. Didn't. Throughout the evening they played roles too well. Toasts clinked. She laughed at his murmured asides. He looked at her too long for it to remain performance. Every time she tried to remember this was strategic. His gaze rewrote the script. Between conversations, he guided her to the balcony overlooking the river. City lights trembled on the water. "You're doing better than I expected," he said. "And you're more civil than gossip promised," she replied. The wind teased loose strands of her hair. He leaned against the railing. "Civil doesn't mean harmless." "I know." She studied his profile. Steady, pensive, jagged around the edges like someone carved out of caution. "You carry yourself like a man afraid of gentleness." The comment drew a sound that might have been a laugh, might have been disbelief. "Gentleness has a cost." You learn to ration it. Maybe you forget how it feels, she said quietly. A silence hung between them. Then he turned, eyes unexpectedly candid. And you? You believe you can outrun every contract your family ever signed. I'm trying to. Maybe I'm foolish. Maybe you're brave. He paused. Or both. Music drifted through the open doors behind them. For a heartbeat, the world shrank to the hush of river and breathing. The distance between them thinned until she could see the faint pulse in his throat. Everything she had fled, ownership, duty, captivity, warned her to step back. Instead, she whispered, "We should go in before they notice." Marco's smile was small, almost wistful. They already notice. That's the point. Later, in the car returning to the coastal house, the performance continued in silence. Rain slicked the highway again, same rhythm as the night they met. Elena traced the window fog with one finger. All these people believing a lie just to stop a war. Marco kept his eyes on the road. Every piece needs a story to hide behind. We just happen to be the characters this time. Her laughter was soft. And what happens when the story ends? He didn't answer immediately. The wipers beat twice before he spoke. Then we find out whether it was a lie. He pulled into the driveway, headlights slicing through mist. As she reached for the door handle, his hand brushed her arm. Accidental or not, she couldn't tell. The spark of contact froze her breath. "Be careful tomorrow," he said. "Costello's people will attend the meeting. They'll look at you the way predators look at proof." "I'm used to scrutiny," she said. "Not this kind." She stepped out into the drizzle. "Then I'll borrow your composure." Marco watched her cross the threshold, that green dress flowing like defiance, and for the first time since inheriting an empire built on blood, he wondered whether the thing he was protecting was peace or her. The truce meeting was supposed to be symbolic, leaders clasping hands over linen and champagne instead of over gunmetal, but Elena had lived in this world long enough to know symbolism gets people killed. The gathering took place in a converted opera hall on the river. Soft light, champagne flutes, and under the velvet hush, a tension thick enough to choke on. Every crime family in the region sent a representative. Marco brought Elena because half the peace depended on the illusion of their union. Her fingers twined through his as they entered together, cameras flashing like muzzle fire. To the untrained eye it looked like an engagement celebration. The truth was uglier. At the curved table near the stage, Liam Costello smiled his politician's smile. Cool, camera-tested, hiding rot underneath. "So it's true," he drawled. "Our runaway bride has found another altar." Elena stayed silent, squeezing Marco's hand beneath the tablecloth. He answered for both of them. "The lady made her own choice." "Did she?" Liam asked. "Or did you make it for her?" Before Marco could respond, Costello lifted a crystal flute. "To cooperation and honesty," he said, voice feather-light. And then he drank. A minute later, the lights flickered. A crash answered from the foyer, too sharp to be accidental. Chairs scraped, guards reached for weapons. Marco rose instantly, pulling Elena behind him. His hand dove inside his jacket. "Stay close." Gunfire split the air. The grand chandelier shivered, crystal raining onto marble. People scattered. Waiters hit the floor. Elena's memories fractured into flashes. Marco shoving her behind a column, the echo of shouted orders, the streak of blood on ivory stone. She smelled cordite, saw fear bloom across expensively powdered faces. Liam Costello stood at the top of the staircase, pistol in hand, smirk turning into something feral. "You always thought you could control everything, DeLuca. But tonight the story changes. "Get her out!" shouted one of Marco's men. Elena moved before anyone could drag her. Across the chaos, she spotted a laptop bag near the press table. Marco's intel, the files proving Costello's deals with the Russians. If it was lost, the cost of peace doubled. She dashed for it, heels slipping on glass. A hand clamped her shoulder. She swung around, slamming the heavy bag straight into a gun arm. A shot hissed past her cheek and buried itself in marble. She didn't scream. There was no room for sound in survival. Marco appeared from nowhere, hauling her toward an emergency exit. His shirt was torn, blood at the edge of his collar. Not his, she hoped. They burst into the alley behind the hall, breath clouding in the cold. He turned on her, furious and terrified in equal measure. "Do you have any idea what you just—" "Yes." She shoved the laptop against his chest. "I saved the proof. Flanagan's emails, transfers, all of it." For a moment, incredulity eclipsed anger. Then he exhaled a shaking laugh. "Remind me never to underestimate you again." Sirens wailed somewhere distant. Inside the hall, the truce unraveled. Marco pulled her close, tucking her under his arm as security vehicles screamed past. "They'll paint this as an assassination," he said. "Costello tried to frame me and walked into his own trap instead. Every alliance he built today collapses with him." Elena's hands trembled, but her voice stayed level. "So it's over." Marco looked down at her, at the woman he'd drafted as camouflage and found standing amid bullets with fire in her eyes. "Maybe the war," he said quietly. "Not the truth." The weight of his gaze made her stomach twist painfully with something that wasn't fear. "Then what's next?" He touched her cheek, thumb brushing a streak of dust. "Whatever choice you make when all debts are settled." Behind them, smoke rose from the opera hall, the last act of a piece written in lies. Ahead, the river reflected the flash of police lights like broken glass. Elena realized freedom wasn't a place or a new name. It was this feeling, standing in ruin and still choosing who to trust. Calder's Bay felt smaller after the blood and headlines. The truce had dissolved into investigations, empty statements on television, and the kind of silence that follows a war people pretend never happened. Papers called it the opera incident. The police called it civil unrest. In every story, Marco DeLuca was either savior or serpent, depending on who paid for ink. Elena watched the coverage from the corner of Marco's office. 3 weeks since the shooting and still, every mention of her name was unconfirmed. It was a fragile anonymity, but for the first time it was hers. Marco entered quietly, jacket draped over one shoulder. The cut above his collarbone had healed. His expression hadn't. "They'll keep digging," he said. "O'Rourke investments are under audit. Costello's empire is splitting in half. You could disappear now and no one would blame you." She turned down the television. "And leave you answering for both families' sins. Freedom shouldn't look like abandonment." He smiled, more tired than amused. "You think I deserve saving? I think everyone deserves one clean page." Marco leaned against the desk, studying her with a half-guarded curiosity she'd come to recognize. "If I tell you I've already used my last clean page, then we'll start on the margins." They left the city that evening, driving north until skyscrapers yielded to pine and fog. A safe house waited by the lake, a modest cabin, the same one Marco's mother had once used to escape the noise. It smelled of cedar and something older, like time storing its breath. Inside, patience blossomed between them in small rituals. She cooked, he fixed the shutters. They argued about coffee strength, shared silence when words grew dangerous. Somewhere in the lull between sunrise and surrender, attraction blurred into belonging. One night by the fire, he broke the stillness. "There's an offer from federal prosecutors. If I hand over the files, testify, half my father's organization goes down. The rest, they'll vanish overseas. And you, they'll expect me to cut a deal and disappear." She folded her arms. "Are you tempted?" He stared into the flames. "For the first time in my life, yes. Because for the first time, there's something I'd rather live for than rule." Her pulse jumped. "And what happens if you stay?" "Then I rebuild differently. Legitimate. Shipping, trade, everything above water." He looked at her. "But I'd need someone who speaks more than one language of survival." Elena laughed softly. "That's your proposal. I'm not good at weddings." "That's fortunate," she said, sliding closer until their hands touched. "Neither am I." Morning carried a crisp quiet across the lake. Marco stood outside, phone to his ear, voice low and certain. When he came back inside, his shoulders looked lighter. "It's done," he said. "Files delivered. Statement recorded. They'll announce indictments by Monday. So that's it. That's it. For me at least." He hesitated. "For you, I can arrange a new passport, a new life anywhere." She cut him off gently. "Stop choosing for me, Marco. I already chose." He frowned. "What did you choose?" "To stop running. To build something with someone who finally understands what starting over costs." He stepped closer, searching her face for a lie and finding none. "You're sure? The DeLuca name isn't. Then we'll make it mean something new." The lake wind swept through the open doorway, carrying the scent of pine and promise. Marco reached for her hand. Not possessively this time, not as a shield, but as an invitation. Freedom, Elena realized, wasn't the absence of chains. It was the moment two people decided not to repeat their parents' mistakes. They stood there until the sun broke over the water, light spilling across their intertwined shadows. Two survivors learning that redemption, like love, only matters when it changes what comes next. The first snow arrived quietly, as if unsure it was welcome. It touched the roof of the lakeside cabin, softened the gravel road where Marco's tire tracks had long since faded, and laid itself over the garden Elena had planted, a hesitant patch of herbs and winter roses fighting their way through frost. She stood on the porch, mug in hand, watching breath plume in the cold and thinking how peace never announces itself. It creeps in, shy and a little guilty. Behind her, the radio murmured breaking news. Federal trials postponed, certain names redacted for operational safety. The machine had eaten its own tail, and somehow they were both still standing. Marco stepped outside, jacket half-buttoned, hair damp from the shower. For once, his phone wasn't within reach. "You're up early," he said. "Couldn't sleep." The quiet feels unnatural. That's what normal sounds like. "Maybe," she said, smiling faintly. "But normal doesn't trust itself around here." He joined her at the railing. For a long while they said nothing, only listened to the muted world. Every story they'd lived, duty, violence, betrayal, seemed like someone else's legend now, told around a fire for the benefit of strangers. Yet each scar pulsed when the wind shifted, reminding them freedom comes with debts you can't always settle. Later that day a letter arrived. No stamp, only a wax seal Elena recognized. Her father's. She opened it in silence. He wrote that he had heard of Marco's testimony, that Boston streets were calmer, that he hoped she'd found what she was looking for. One line stood out, written in a steadier hand. "You broke the chain. Don't put it back on for anyone." She folded the letter carefully, slid it into a drawer she rarely opened, and let out a breath that sounded like forgiveness. When Marco came in from the cold, she held his gaze. "My father knows we're alive." He arched a brow. "Dangerous information." "Maybe. But I don't think he'll use it. He sounds tired." Marco poured coffee into 2 chipped mugs. "Perhaps he's finally learned what it means to retire." They sat near the fire he had coaxed to life. The flames threw restless color over the room. Amber over iron, warmth over old ghosts. She asked, "Do you ever regret turning your family in?" He shook his head slowly. "I regret every year I didn't." "That's not regret," she said. "That's growth." He laughed under his breath, a rare unguarded sound. "Careful, Elena O'Rourke. Philosophy's more dangerous than gunfire." She nudged his shoulder. "I've survived both." Night came early, the kind that turns windows into mirrors. Elena watched her reflection. Softer lines, steadier eyes. The woman staring back wasn't the bride who'd run through rain with panic in her throat. She was someone who had bargained with a criminal and found the humanity buried under the legend. Marco joined her, arm brushing hers. "You thinking about leaving again?" She shook her head. "For once, I'm exactly where I want to be." "Careful," he murmured. "That sounds like happiness. Or something close enough." Out on the frozen lake, a single light blinked. A fisherman's shelter or maybe a signal from another life. Either way, they didn't move. Their world had shrunk to fireplace glow and quiet hearts that still knew how to ache. It wasn't the ending she had imagined when she fled a wedding altar, but it was the ending she had earned. 2 people learning how to be free without vanishing, how to love without ownership, how to exist with the ghosts without letting them steer. Some debts stay unpaid, some names unspoken, but for now, and maybe that's all any story needs, they had peace. And peace, however fragile, was finally theirs.